It was a day unlike any other in the Grand Council Hall of the Intergalactic Empire. The room buzzed with anticipation as alien leaders and diplomats from across the galaxy gathered for a critical meeting. The air was thick with tension as the fate of numerous planets rested on the discussions about to unfold. Amidst this power struggle, one figure stood out: Princess Cyrilith, an alien princess from the powerful Ilori species. She was regal, tall, and impossibly beautiful, her violet skin shimmering under the hall's lights. But it was not her beauty that made everyone uneasy. It was her words. In a shocking move, she suddenly stood, her sharp, otherworldly eyes locking onto the assembly of leaders and delegates. "I demand a human," she declared in a voice that was calm, but full of authority. "I demand one as my mate." The room fell silent. A human. The request seemed absurd. The council had long debated the inferiority of humans. Despite their intelligence and resilience, humans were considered weak by most of the galaxy's advanced species. No one in the room could fathom why the princess, who could choose any of the finest warriors or scholars in the galaxy, would settle for a human. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the crowd, but Cyrilith's gaze remained unwavering. Her eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge her decision. But no one spoke. No one dared to question the princess, whose family ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. She was the last of her kind, and heir to a dying dynasty, and her will was as strong as any empire's might. As the moments dragged on in silence, the tension was palpable. The alien ambassadors exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure of how to respond. The human representatives, who had been invited to the council under diplomatic terms, were especially perplexed. They had never anticipated such a declaration. Humans had barely been considered worthy of any real position in galactic politics, let alone being chosen by a princess as her mate. "Why a human?" one of the older alien diplomats finally managed to ask, his voice shaking with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Cyrilith's lips curled into a small smile, but it held no warmth. "The reasons are my own," she said cryptically. "But I will have him, and no one will stop me." The council hall remained silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. The princess had spoken, and her decision was final. Yet there was no clarity as to why she would choose a human, a species she had likely never even encountered personally. As the meeting ended, the princess's command remained in everyone's mind. The question echoed in their minds long after they had left the hall. Why a human? Miles away from the Grand Council Hall, in a small, quiet town on Earth, Jason Bennett was living an ordinary life. He worked as a mechanic, fixing engines, repairing machines, and enjoying the simple pleasures of his unremarkable existence. He never imagined that his life would change, let alone be dragged into the galaxy's most important political affairs. But on that day, everything changed. Jason was at work, elbow deep in the engine of a car, when a bright light suddenly flashed in the sky. He looked up, squinting as a massive spaceship descended from the heavens, its engines roaring like thunder. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. A colossal ship made of materials that didn't even exist on Earth, and before he could fully comprehend what was happening, he found himself standing on that very ship, miles above the planet. Confusion and fear gripped him. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Before he could gather his thoughts, a group of alien soldiers approached, their cold eyes studying him like he was a piece of meat. They didn't speak, but their actions were clear. He was to follow them, and that was it. As he was escorted deeper into the ship, Jason couldn't help but wonder what had just happened. Why was he chosen? Why him, of all people? Was this some kind of mistake? But it was no mistake. Soon, he learned the truth. The princess of the Ilori people had chosen him. The same princess who had declared before the entire galaxy that she would have a human as her mate. Jason had heard rumors of her. Everyone had. Princess Cyrilith was known across the galaxy for her beauty, power, and her mysterious reputation. She was the last of her kind, the Ilori race on the brink of extinction. She was also feared by many. Yet there was one thing about her that no one truly understood: why she would choose a human. As Jason was escorted to the royal quarters, his mind raced. Why me? He thought again and again. He was just an ordinary man, no special skills, no extraordinary history. He was no hero, no leader, just a mechanic from a small town on Earth. He had no idea how to even begin understanding why he was standing in front of a princess who, for all intents and purposes, should have had access to the best and brightest the galaxy had to offer. The doors to the royal chambers opened, and Jason was led inside. There, sitting on a throne made of alien metals and glowing crystals, was Princess Cerilith. Her presence was overwhelming. Her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, locked onto him the moment he entered the room. There was an aura of power around her, yet it was tempered with something else, something softer that Jason couldn't quite place. "Welcome, human," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "I've waited a long time for you." Jason stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do. Waited for me? He couldn't understand. He had never met her before, never even heard of her personally. Yet here he was, standing in front of the most powerful being in the galaxy, and the only thing that seemed clear was that his life would never be the same. Jason could hardly believe what was happening. He stood frozen in the center of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The Princess Cerilith, was staring at him with an intensity that made him feel as though she could see through him. Her violet eyes were full of something he couldn't understand. A mixture of curiosity, expectation, and something deeper, something more personal. She motioned for him to approach, and though every part of him screamed to turn and run, he found himself walking forward, unable to stop. The closer he got, the more overwhelming her presence became. He had read about powerful leaders, but this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, as if her very being was filled with untold power. As Jason reached the base of her throne, Cerilith slowly stood, her movements graceful, almost fluid. She was tall and elegant, her appearance alien yet somehow captivating. Her skin glimmered under the soft lighting of the room, shimmering in shades of deep purple and silver. She was the epitome of beauty and strength, and Jason couldn't help but feel small in her presence. "You must be wondering why I chose you," she said, her voice smooth but with an edge of authority. "Why a human, when I could have any of the finest warriors or scholars in the galaxy?" Jason didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to ask a million questions, but another part of him was too afraid to speak. He had no idea how to respond to a being so powerful, so far beyond his understanding. "I am not like the others," she continued, her eyes never leaving his. "My people are dying. We are the last of the Vylori. The prophecy speaks of one who can save us, and that one is you." Jason blinked, confusion flooding his mind. "What do you mean, I can save you? I'm just a mechanic from Earth. I'm nobody." Cerilith smiled softly, but there was no warmth in it. "You are not just anything. You are the key, and I need you by my side, not only to break the curse that has plagued my people, but to fulfill a destiny that has been written long before we even met." Jason could hardly process what she was saying. A prophecy, a curse. It all sounded too strange, too far-fetched. He wasn't a hero, and he certainly wasn't anything special. Yet here he was, standing before a princess who believed he was the answer to her people's salvation. "You don't understand yet," Cerilith said, her tone almost regretful. "But you will. In time, you will see that we are bound together by forces beyond our control. I have waited for this moment for a long time." Jason shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind. "I don't understand. Why me? Why a human?" Cerilith's eyes softened, and for the first time, Jason saw a flicker of vulnerability in her. "Because you are more than what you seem. The universe has its own plans, and sometimes those plans bring two souls together in the most unexpected ways." Jason stared at her, still unsure of what to think. This was too much. His world had just been turned upside down, and he had no idea how to handle it. All he knew for sure was that his life would never be the same. Days passed, and Jason found himself adjusting to life on the massive alien ship. He had been given a room near the princess's chambers, and though it wasn't much different from a luxurious hotel suite, it felt empty. Every corner of the ship seemed to hum with energy, and Jason couldn't escape the constant buzz in his mind. He had so many questions, and yet the answers he was given only led to more confusion. He spent his time wandering the corridors of the ship, trying to make sense of what was happening. He had come to terms with the fact that he was far from home, light years away from Earth, and that this strange world was now his reality. But nothing about it felt real. He felt like an outsider, caught up in something too big to understand. One evening, as Jason sat by the large window overlooking the endless expanse of space, there was a soft knock at his door. He hadn't expected visitors, especially not after the princess had left him alone for the past few days. "Come in," he called, his voice slightly shaky. The door opened, and to his surprise, it was Sirelith who entered, her purple eyes glimmering in the soft light of the room. She closed the door behind her and stood silently for a moment, as though deciding how to begin. Jason noticed that she was dressed in simple robes now, her usual regal attire replaced by something less intimidating, though still graceful. "I see you've been thinking," Sirelith said, her voice calm yet tinged with something that felt like curiosity. Jason stood up from his chair, unsure of what to say. "I don't understand any of this. Why me? Why a human? What's this prophecy you keep talking about?" Sirelith's expression softened, and she took a few steps closer. "You're not just anyone. You are part of something greater than both of us. It's not just fate that brought you here. It's destiny." Jason's brow furrowed in confusion. "Destiny? I'm just a guy who fixes cars. I don't think I'm some chosen one." Sirelith smiled faintly. "That's exactly what you are. The prophecy I mentioned speaks of a time when the Vylori would fall, when our people would cease to exist. But it also speaks of one who would appear to save us, a human, someone from a distant world, who would hold the key to our survival. You are the one foretold." Jason shook his head, trying to make sense of her words. "I don't understand. How can a mechanic like me be the key to saving your entire race? What makes you so sure about this prophecy?" Sirelith hesitated for a moment, her eyes darkening with something he hadn't seen before, something deep and ancient. "It's because of a curse, Jason, a curse that my people have carried for centuries. It was a curse brought upon us by our own actions, an act of betrayal against humans long ago. And now, only a human can undo it. Only you can break it." Jason took a step back, his mind spinning. "So this curse, it's my fault, because I'm human?" Sirelith shook her head quickly. "No, it's not your fault. It's the fault of my ancestors. But it is your presence, your blood, that can bring about the change we need. The curse will only be lifted when you and I come together, as the prophecy says." Jason stood there in stunned silence. This was too much. He had come from a small town, lived a quiet life. Now he was supposed to be part of an ancient prophecy that would save an entire species. Sirelith reached out, gently placing her hand on his arm. "You don't have to understand it all yet. But you need to trust me, Jason. You are the only one who can save us." Jason looked at her, searching her eyes for any sign of doubt, any hint that this was some kind of cruel game. But there was none. She truly believed what she was saying. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," Jason admitted, his voice quieter now. "But if it really means that much to you, I'll try. I'll do whatever I can." Sirelith gave him a small, grateful smile. "That's all I ask." As the days turned into weeks, Jason's understanding of the Vylori people and their troubled history deepened. He had been given access to the royal archives, vast libraries filled with ancient scrolls and holographic records. Though they were difficult to understand, The more he read, the clearer the picture became. The Lylori were once a proud and powerful race, known for their advanced technology and wisdom. They had ruled vast regions of the galaxy, and their empire was unmatched. But with their power came arrogance. They believed themselves to be superior to all other species, including humans. The Lylori saw humans as primitive, weak beings unworthy of their attention. But that belief, Jason learned, had led to their downfall. It all started centuries ago, during a time of great war. The Lylori had sought to expand their empire, conquering new worlds and subjugating those they deemed lesser. One of the species they attacked was humanity. At the time, humans had been struggling with their own challenges, still recovering from the devastation of their own wars. They were no match for the Lylori, who struck without mercy. But then, something unexpected happened. Humans, though seemingly weak, were resilient. They fought back. They developed new technologies and strategies that forced the Lylori to retreat. For the first time in history, the Lylori were defeated by a species they had underestimated. The Lylori Empire had been humiliated. Their pride had been shattered. And in their desperation, they'd made a terrible mistake. Rather than accept the loss and make peace, the Lylori leaders made a dark choice. They used their advanced technology to curse humanity, hoping to keep them from ever challenging the Lylori again. They sought to erase any memory of the war and ensure that humans would never rise to power again. The curse, however, was not just a punishment. It was a trap. The curse bound the Lylori to an endless cycle of suffering. The more they tried to escape it, the more it consumed them. Their once great empire began to crumble, and their people began to fade into extinction. The curse had a simple rule. Only the blood of a human, one with no ties to the Lylori, could break it. Only then would the Lylori be free to rebuild, or so the ancient texts claimed. Jason sat back in his chair, the weight of what he had just read sinking in. The Lylori had caused their own destruction. They had cursed themselves in an attempt to keep humans down, but it had backfired, bringing about their own downfall. The princess, Cyrillith, was the last of her kind, the final hope for the Lylori people. But why had the curse chosen him? Why was he the one destined to undo centuries of pain and suffering? Jason had been a simple mechanic, just living his life on Earth. He had no part in the ancient wars or the curse that followed. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Jason looked up to see Cyrillith standing there, her presence as commanding as always. Her eyes met his, and she gave a small, knowing smile. "You've been reading the archives," she said, stepping inside. "I see you've uncovered the truth." Jason stood up, his mind racing. "This curse, it's real. Everything that's happening to your people, it's because of what your ancestors did to humans." Cyrillith nodded solemnly. "Yes, the curse has haunted my people for generations. We thought we could escape it, but we were wrong. The only way to free us is for you and I to fulfill the prophecy." Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. "But how? I'm just one person. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do." Cyrillith's eyes softened, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to understand everything now. But together, we will break the curse. The prophecy has already begun, Jason. The first step is already behind us. Now we must see it through." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of what was happening pressed on him harder than ever before. The fate of an entire species rested on him, on decisions he didn't fully understand. Yet, despite the fear, he felt something else stirring inside him. A determination to help. He couldn't turn his back on Cyrillith now. Not after everything she had shared with him. As the days passed, Jason found himself more deeply involved in the struggles of the Lylori people. The princess, Cyrillith, had trusted him with more and more information about their kingdom, their history, and the curse that had bound them for centuries. But not everyone in the Lylori court was happy about the prophecy or Jason's role in it. The kingdom was divided. While Cyrillith and her closest allies believed in the prophecy and saw Jason as the key to their salvation. Many of the royal advisors and powerful noble families saw him as a threat. To them, a human wasn't just an outsider. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong for the Vailori. They feared what would happen if the curse were broken, and many doubted that the prophecy was even real. Jason could sense the tension every time he walked through the grand halls of the palace. The whispers behind his back grew louder, the cold stares sharper. He had tried to keep to himself, to avoid the political games of the Vailori, but it was impossible. Every step he took seemed to lead him into more trouble. One evening, as he walked down one of the palace's long corridors, he overheard a conversation between two high-ranking nobles. They didn't see him standing there, and their words made his blood run cold. "He's a human," one of them hissed, his voice laced with disgust. "How can we allow him to have any say in our future? The princess has lost her mind." "You're right," the other replied. "If she insists on this union, we may never regain control. Our empire will fall further." Jason stepped back, heart racing. He had suspected that not everyone was on his side, but hearing it out loud made it real. There were those who wanted to use the prophecy to their advantage, and those who would rather see the Vailori continue to suffer than let a human like him have any part in their future. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit back and let Serilith's kingdom fall apart because of him. The next day, Serilith invited him to the royal gardens. As he walked alongside her, surrounded by the beauty of alien plants and trees that hummed with energy, Jason tried to shake off the fear that had settled in his chest. "You've heard the whispers, haven't you?" Serilith asked softly, her voice cutting through the silence. Jason nodded. "They don't want me here. They don't trust me. They see me as a danger to your kingdom." Serilith's expression hardened. "I know, but they are scared. They don't understand what's at stake. The prophecy is not just about me, Jason. It's about all of us. If the curse isn't broken, my people will be lost forever." Jason stopped walking and looked at her. "But I can't do it alone. I'm just one person. What if they turn against us?" The princess placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but comforting. "You're not alone. You've never been alone in this, Jason. I will protect you. And so will the others who believe in the prophecy." Jason took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in his heart. He had no choice but to trust her. If they were going to have any chance of saving her people, he would have to push past the fear and the doubt and step into the role that the prophecy had set for him. Serilith looked at him with determination in her eyes. "The kingdom may be divided, but we will unite it. Together, we will break the curse." Jason nodded, feeling the first spark of hope ignite inside him. He didn't know how, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't back down now. The future of the Vailori depended on it. The days seemed to stretch on as Jason and Serilith navigated the increasing tension within the palace. While Serilith continued to meet with her most trusted allies, Jason spent most of his time in his quarters, wrestling with the weight of his new life. He had become more than just a spectator in this world. He was now part of a battle far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Serilith's presence was a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation. She would visit him daily, often speaking of the prophecy, but there was something in her demeanor that Jason hadn't seen before. Something fragile, something uncertain. The once unshakable princess now seemed to carry the weight of her people's future on her shoulders. One evening, as Jason stood by the window, gazing out at the stars, he heard a soft knock on his door. He turned to see Serilith standing there, her face more tired than usual. "Jason, can we talk?" she asked quietly. He nodded, stepping aside to let her in. The moment she entered, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, as if taking a moment to collect herself. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I'm starting to question everything," she said, her voice low and filled with an emotion Jason hadn't expected to hear from her. "I've spent my whole life being told I am the one who will save my people, But now, with everything happening, with you, I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. Jason walked toward her, his heart aching at the pain in her voice. You're not alone in this, Sarilith. I'm here. I'll help however I can. She shook her head, her eyes dark with doubt. It's not just that. I've seen what my people are capable of. They're scared of what we're trying to do. Some of them want to use you, Jason. They don't understand that breaking the curse is not about power. It's about survival. Jason reached out, gently placing a hand on her arm. You don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm not here because I was forced into this. I'm here because I believe in what we're doing. Sarilith looked at him, her gaze filled with a mix of surprise and gratitude. She seemed to take comfort in his words, but the tension still lingered in the room. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't ask to be the last of my kind. I didn't ask for my people's fate to rest on my shoulders, and I didn't ask for you to be part of it. But now that you are, I can't imagine doing this without you. Jason's heart swelled. He didn't know what he had expected when he first arrived on the Ilori ship, but it certainly hadn't been this feeling of closeness, of connection. It was more than just the prophecy. He had come to care for Sarilith, to care for her people. I don't know what the future holds, but I'll stand with you, Jason said firmly. We'll face it together, no matter what happens. A small, sad smile tugged at the corners of Sarilith's lips. You don't know how much that means to me, Jason. I have never felt so alone, until now. Jason squeezed her arm reassuringly. You're not alone anymore. We'll find a way through this. For the first time in days, Sarilith seemed to relax, the weight on her shoulders lifting just slightly. Thank you, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for not turning your back on me. Jason didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if they could defeat the curse, or if the Ilori would ever accept him as part of their future. But in that moment, as he stood next to Sarilith, he knew one thing for certain. He would stand by her side no matter what. The tension within the Ilori kingdom continued to grow, and Jason could feel it everywhere he went. The nobles who opposed Sarilith's plan watched him with suspicion, and the whispers of rebellion grew louder with every passing day. But despite the growing conflict, Jason knew one thing. He couldn't turn back now. He had come this far, and he couldn't let Sarilith down. She had trusted him, and he was beginning to trust her too. One day, as the two of them walked through the palace gardens, Sarilith turned to Jason with a serious expression. I've made arrangements, she said. It's time to gather the allies we need. Jason raised an eyebrow. Allies? I thought most of the court didn't want anything to do with us. Sarilith nodded. That's true. But there are still those who believe in the prophecy. They may not have power in the council, but they have influence among the people. We need them if we're going to succeed. Jason looked at her, uncertainty creeping into his mind. How do you know they'll help us? Sarilith smiled faintly, the corners of her lips barely lifting. Because they're not just allies of mine. They're allies of the truth. They know that if we don't act now, it will be too late. Jason felt a surge of determination. This was it. He was about to take part in something that could change everything, not just for Sarilith, but for the entire Ilori race. They couldn't let fear and uncertainty stand in their way. That night, they traveled in secrecy, leaving the royal palace and heading to a hidden part of the Ilori capital. Jason had never seen this part of the city before. It was old, ancient even. The architecture here was vastly different from the sleek, futuristic designs of the palace. Everything seemed to hum with a history Jason couldn't quite understand, as if this place had witnessed generations of stories, some of them good, others dark. They arrived at a large, open hall carved into the side of a mountain. The walls were covered with ancient symbols, and the air felt heavy with the weight of time. Inside, several figures stood waiting, figures Jason recognized only from the stories Sarilith had shared with him. These were the Ilori who had stayed true to the old ways, who still believed in the prophecy and the need for change. The leader of this group, an older Ilori woman named Talira, stepped forward. Her eyes were filled with wisdom, and she studied Jason closely, as though weighing his very soul. "You are the one," Talira said, her voice deep and commanding. "The one who will break the curse." Jason nodded, though part of him still felt like an outsider. He had never been a part of anything like this, and yet here he was, standing among the very people who were supposed to guide the fate of an entire race. He didn't feel like he belonged, but he couldn't back down now. "I'll do whatever it takes," Jason said, his voice firm. Talira studied him for a long moment before nodding. "We've all made our choices, young human. Now we must make our stand." Cyrilith stepped forward, her eyes meeting Jason's with a mixture of determination and gratitude. "With your help, we can break the curse. Together, we will free the Ilori from the past." As the group discussed their plans, Jason felt a sense of unity that had been missing from his life. Despite the odds, despite the uncertainty, these Ilori were willing to fight for something greater than themselves. It was something Jason understood well. He wasn't just fighting for Cyrilith or for the Ilori. He was fighting for a future, one where fear and doubt no longer controlled their lives. With the unlikely allies gathered and their path now clear, Jason knew that the real battle was just beginning. The days leading up to the final test were filled with tension and preparation. Jason had seen the determination in Cyrilith's eyes, but he could also sense her fear. This was it. They were about to face the challenge that could either free the Ilori from their curse or doom them to an uncertain future. The stakes were higher than ever, and Jason felt the weight of it all pressing on him. The plan was simple. They would venture to the heart of the ancient Ilori temple, a place that had long been abandoned by most of her people. Deep within the temple was a relic, an ancient artifact known as the Key of Rebirth. The prophecy had always spoken of it, but no one had been able to locate it. Cyrilith believed it would unlock the power to break the curse and save her people. But the temple was not a safe place. Legends told of dangerous traps, and the temple's deep labyrinths were filled with unknown perils. Jason had no idea what to expect, but he knew one thing. He couldn't back out now. The group of allies had gathered, and together with Cyrilith, they'd made their way to the temple. The journey took them through thick forests, across vast plains, and into the heart of the mountains. The further they went, the more Jason felt the weight of history on his shoulders. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to change. When they finally arrived at the temple, Jason's heart raced. The entrance loomed before them, dark and imposing. It looked like it had been untouched for centuries, its stone walls weathered by time. Cyrilith stepped forward, her expression determined. "This is where it all ends," she said softly. "We either break the curse here, or we lose everything." Jason nodded, feeling the gravity of her words. As they entered the temple, the air grew colder. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, but Cyrilith's light, a glowing orb she carried with her, illuminated the way. The group moved cautiously, knowing the dangers that lay ahead. They navigated the narrow hallways, past ancient statues, and crossed crumbling bridges that spanned deep chasms. Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the temple's beauty, despite its danger. This was a place of immense history, a place where the fate of the Ilori people had been sealed. Finally, they reached the heart of the temple, a vast chamber with high ceilings covered in ancient markings. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which lay the Key of Rebirth. But as Cyrilith stepped forward to take it, the ground beneath them trembled. The walls of the temple began to shift, and a low rumbling sound filled the air. Jason's heart raced. They had triggered something. The temple was reacting to their presence, and it wasn't going to make it easy for them to succeed. Suddenly, the chamber was filled with shifting rocks, and the floor began to crack open. Traps set long ago began to activate, and Jason knew they had only moments to act. "We need to move," Cyrilith shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Jason grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the cracking ground. The group scrambled, trying to navigate the chaos as the temple seemed to come alive around them. Cyrillith reached the pedestal, her hands shaking as she took the key of rebirth. The moment she touched it, the entire chamber fell silent. The shaking stopped, the traps froze, and the temple's ancient energy shifted. Cyrillith held the key in her hands, and for the first time, Jason saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear. It was hope. The curse was no longer an unstoppable force. It could be broken. The key of rebirth lay heavy in Cyrillith's hands, its ancient power pulsing through the air. For a moment, everything was still, the temple silent, as if holding its breath. Jason stood beside her, his heart racing, knowing that the fate of the Lylori people rested on what happened next. Cyrillith glanced at him, her expression filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "It's time," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is the moment we've all been waiting for." Jason nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. Could a simple human like him truly break the curse that had haunted the Lylori for centuries? He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man caught in the middle of something far bigger than himself. But standing here, in this moment, he knew there was no turning back. With a deep breath, Cyrillith placed the key into the stone pedestal in front of her. There was a flash of light, and the ground trembled once again. The ancient magic of the temple seemed to awaken, responding to the key's power. Jason stepped back, instinctively reaching out to Cyrillith as the light intensified. The walls of the temple shimmered, the ancient runes on the stone glowing with an eerie light. The air felt thick, charged with energy. Jason could feel the pulse of it in his chest, as if the very planet itself was reacting to the key. The Lylori curse that had plagued their people for centuries had been tied to this moment. If they failed, everything would be lost. Cyrillith's eyes were locked on the key as it began to glow brighter, the magic unraveling before them. Slowly, she spoke the ancient words that had been passed down through the generations. The language was strange to Jason, but the power in her voice was undeniable. The temple responded with a deep, resonant hum, the vibrations flowing through the very stone beneath their feet. Suddenly, the light exploded, and for a moment, everything went white. Jason shielded his eyes, feeling the intense energy radiating from the key. When the light finally faded, the temple was silent once more. The air felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Jason slowly lowered his hand, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. Cyrillith stood there, her hand still on the pedestal, but her face was filled with disbelief. "It's done," she whispered. Jason took a cautious step forward. Did it work? Cyrillith turned to him, a slow smile spreading across her face. For the first time in days, the weight of her responsibility seemed to lift. It worked. The curse is broken. Jason felt his breath catch in his throat. The curse that had haunted her people for centuries was finally gone. There was no more fear of extinction, no more uncertainty. The Lylori had a future again. Cyrillith looked at Jason, her eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper, something that had grown between them over their time together. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. "You've changed everything." Jason smiled back, his heart filled with relief and a quiet joy. "I didn't do it alone." The two of them stood there, in the heart of the temple, as the first rays of light from the outside world began to filter in. It was a new beginning, not just for the Lylori, but for Jason as well. He had come to this place a stranger, uncertain of his place in the galaxy, but now he understood his role. He wasn't just a human who had been dragged into an alien war. He was part of something bigger, a new chapter in the history of the Lylori people. As they made their way out of the temple, the sound of a distant celebration reached their ears. The Lylori had already begun to celebrate their freedom. Jason and Cyrillith had done it. They had broken the curse. And in that moment, Jason knew that no matter what came next, he had found something worth fighting for, a future filled with hope.